Welcome to the Heartland Journal's Tennessee podcast with your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome back to the show. Glad you found us. I'm Steve Abramowitz, and this is the heartlandjournal.com podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and pass it around. We only grow with your help. I'm sure you've heard me say that. And it's true. Thanks for doing it. On this show, we are focusing on our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community. Today, we are talking with a very special guest in studio, Senator Mark Pody. Senator Pody is a Republican from Lebanon's Tennessee, District 17. Davidson, parts of Nashville and Wilson County, including B&A, the Nashville Airport, and Mount Juliet, fastest growing part of Tennessee. After the 2010 census, each senator represented 193,195 residents. As of the 2020 census, Tennessee state senators represent an average of 209,603 residents, fast-growing state. Senate member of the 110th through 114th General Assemblies, which just ended last week. House member of the 107th through 110th General Assemblies, Chairman, Tennessee Legislative Prayer Caucus, Vice Chairperson, Transportation and Safety Committee, Member Education Committee, Member Energy, Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, 2015 Child Advocacy Award. Join me for a special sit-down with Senator Mark Pody right after this. Senator Pody, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm blessed and honored to be here.
Yes. Well, thank you for coming all the way down with that Nashville traffic to Little West Haven to our in-studio show, folks, number 2. And we are very honored to have you. Thank you very much. So we invited you down here to ask a couple questions about the session that just ended, but I wanted to start a little bit back in time. Before I even got here, and as you know, I come from Seattle. You come from Washington. We have some DNA there, some soil. But Governor Lee, he signed the state's legislative district into law, yours, 17, on February 6, 2022. On November 22, 2023, the Davidson County Chancery Court struck down the state Senate map, declaring it unconstitutional. They shrunk it from the Kentucky border to just Lebanon, and you lost Carthage, like the Spartans. How did that change affect your ability to represent folks? And did you still get the 209,000 residents average like all the Tennessee senators are supposed to get?
Sure. And let me break this and unpack it for just a second, because that lawsuit's still going on. So we lost in court, and then we appealed it. We lost in that court, and then it was given to the Supreme Court, the Tennessee Supreme Court. That was last October. And it's sitting there since October till now. And what the court case is basically saying is this. In Davidson County, according to the Constitution, all of the Senate numbers have to be sequential. So right now, the people in Davidson County are numbers Senate District 19, 20, and 21. I am number 17, which means I'm one digit off. If I was number 18 or number 22, there would be no lawsuit that way. However, what it's going to boil down to is this. When we did this and we were redistricting, the Democrats have done this for decades. So we look back in history, this is exactly what they did. So now that the Republicans are in control, we just did what the Democrats have done. But the courts have basically said, we don't care what happened, who broke the law earlier. We're holding you to this standard and you can't. So we've made that case, that argument. Supreme Court will rule on it shortly. That means that my district might change. And they took away, and I lost several of our wonderful counties. It was Macon County, it was Clay County, Smith, DeKalb, Cannon. So I had wonderful rural counties. They put me into Nashville. Nashville is a different type of constituents in the rural counties that were very, very conservative, very Christian, very much focused on our Judeo-Christian values. In Davidson County, it's a little bit more liberal. So we've taken that, and I'm going to look at it as God's enlarged my territory. And I'm not there to change who I am, but I do want to make a difference of the territory I represent. I literally want to bring in and saying that what they're saying and some of these beliefs that they have is not okay. This is not the biblical standard that we were founded on. And I'm going to continue to make that stance, even in Davidson County, saying this is who I am. I'm not here to change, but I am here to share the values and give you a choice of what you want to choose in Davidson County.
This is really a beautiful thing because you are the linchpin, let's just say, between a very blue Davidson County, which is Nashville, everybody,
Yes.
and your conservative rural county that you used to have was bigger and now smaller, but you are the guy standing there at the gates. You won in 2018 in a landslide by any measure, 70-29 against a Democrat. So it's fair to say District 17, D17 is conservative, right?
Yes.
And obviously in their voting and their values. Tell us about the experience of working with the blue Davidson County, coming from the red other county, let's just call
Yes.
it, and how you've been successful.
So if I'm true to my values, which is going to be standing up for my Christian values and standing on my biblical values and marrying that with the Constitution and saying, this is who I am, and these are the principles I stand on, and then I'm going to let each person make that decision. And my best avenue to go into Davidson County is saying, God, I need you to help me change hearts. And just let your Holy Spirit rule. Let your Holy Spirit let people hear the truth, and they can make decisions from there. I believe that as people are saying, what I would say in my rural counties, I would get people to stand up and give me a standing ovation. What I say in Davidson County, some people wouldn't even hardly acknowledge that I spoke. But I'd have people come afterwards and say, Mark, you're the only person that said this in Davidson County, and I've always been a Democrat because there was nobody else to even look at or to choose from. So I know there's people that are making that thought process and that change, and I believe that they're shifting and they're saying, if there is a voice and somebody is standing up, that they're willing to come along with the values that I have.
Well, you were literally Daniel in the lion's den on occasion because here you are, like you said, standing up to the blue culture coming from the red culture. The only other person I can think of who has as tough a job, if not tougher than you, would be Brent Taylor over in Memphis, trying to bring conservative values and clean up law and order and crime in a very, very secular blue district, Shelby County.
Yes.
Is that familiar? Okay.
That is very familiar, yes. So we're both doing that, and we're going to continue to stand up for who we are because we believe that standing on the biblical values is the right thing to do. And, it talks about in the Old Testament, you got a person, and you all know the story that there's 2 fires built, and you got one against 700 prophets of Baal, and he says, you build your fire first to get everything ready, and you call your God to light it, and I'll call my God when you're done, And sometimes I feel the same way because the whole Old Testament was all going to pagans, and you had one person that says, I'm standing with the Lord. I'm standing with God, and things change. And in no way am I trying to equate myself that way, except I'm taking that as an example and saying, God, doesn't matter who or what. If I'm standing for you, if I'm standing for the beliefs you're telling me, you're going to be the one protect me. You're going to be the one that's going to rescue me. It's not by my wisdom. It's not by anything else. It's because the Lord has me there. And if the Lord has me there, he'll protect me.
There's only 2 ways that can go because it's obviously a democracy. So majority rules. Either they're going to listen to you and go with you as a Democratic district, or they're going to cut your head off like a lion might do. So the hope is obviously you end up like Daniel and do great things. Do you think the 114th Assembly that just ended under Sexton and Bill Lee, can they be considered conservative like your district voters want, or are they more of the compromising with the blue of Nashville itself? And Lee happens to be from this county, Davidson, which is supposedly the most conservative, but I don't think it is. I think yours is. You can tell me your opinion on that. But do you think that the leadership of the last assembly that just ended is working with you or against you?
I would say that I've got strong leaders in the Senate that are working. Some of the leaders are working with me, and they believe exactly what I'm doing and standing. I believe that God's letting me find favor to move some of the things forward. I will tell you that overall, we did not turn like more liberal as a state, but we didn't take some of the conservative steps that we should have. And I will tell you that I was actually chastised by God by something that I did in one of the bills that passed, and it had to do with pro-life, and I voted against the bill that was coming through. I don't remember the bill number. It was like 355 or something, but God let me know I didn't stand up and speak against it, even though I feel I voted correctly. And he said, as a watchman on the wall, if you're silent, what good are you?
What was the intent of the bill?
So it says this for somebody, this is going to be, they're having trouble getting pregnant, and you can go and have a unique way to say, hey, I'm going to take an egg and a sperm and put them together and then transplant them back in the womb.
IVF.
Yes. And what it says is, and people are struggling to get pregnant sometimes, and they want that, and I don't want to take that away. But sometimes you'll take and say, I'm just going to do an example, okay? Let's say we take 20 eggs and we get those 20 eggs going. Some don't make it immediately, but some do, and then they choose some to plant in the womb. Well, what do you do with the ones that you decide against to do it? When does life actually begin? And if life begins, and different people have different philosophies on when life begins, and one of them is, life doesn't begin until it's actually somebody's born and the umbilical cord is cut. Others believe that life starts in the womb and such, and some it's at conception and so forth. So the Supreme Court actually told us in the Roe v. Wade, the dissenting judge said, it's up to the states to define this. And we've not defined it. And so I want to actually go through to define it, that I believe that when an egg and a sperm get together and that forms life, it forms a human being. It doesn't form just a mass of gunk or whatever. It's forming a human being. It's got the DNA, and that DNA is a unique individual. No matter how you do it, that is a unique individual, and I believe that that is life. And I should have protected that. I should have stood up and said that, whether it passed or not. It was me being silent was not right. And I did write a letter to the governor. I had a few of the senators sign it. In fact, Brent Taylor is one of them that signed it. Joey Hensley signed it. Janice Bowling, and said, hey, Governor, please don't pass this and veto the bill. Let's bring it up next year and see if we can't adjust it.
And is it, just to be clear, because it is, a lot of these things are policy and wonky. Are we talking about now giving rights to the egg and the sperm separate, or are we giving it to the combination, which becomes life?
Only when it becomes life.
Conception.
So the question is then...
in vitro fertilization is an egg sitting in a freezer until it's injected, and then it becomes life if it takes.
Yes. So for those eggs that become fertile, okay, but they don't use them, what should happen? How and what that? And I don't want to stop what we're doing, but I just want to make sure that if there's life that's there, that life is protected.
So Tennessee is actually, of the 50 states, and we'll talk about why Tennessee is so unique as we go along, but does have the strictest anti-abortion laws in the country.
Yes.
There was a trigger that went in as soon as Roe versus Wade was finally repealed after 50 years. This all happened, so it wasn't even in your hands. You didn't have to vote for it. It just happened. But now there has been some motions to loosen it. There's also been some work about out-of-state abortion, I forget the word, things that give you an abortion, coming in the mail, things of this nature that didn't actually pass in the Senate, or in the Assembly, which you think would have. What's your take back on the Republicans, being this is a supermajority Republican state, we can't deny that, and their choices in the last Assembly and their protection of that right to life, given how strict we already are? It's only loosening. It's not making it stricter. You can't.
That's correct. And there are a lot of legislators and Republicans, because the Democrats can't do anything, and so it's got to be a Republican decision, that would like to back away a little bit from what we've done. I'm not one of them. I want to make sure that we stand very, very strong and not back away. I do believe this is life. I believe this is what we're protecting. I think this is something that I'm going to be accountable for. What did I do? What did I sacrifice? And just like they sacrifice children to Baal because of convenience, because of whatever, I need to stand and say that that is a life that the Lord created, and I'm going to protect it.
Makes sense. And we can talk about that in terms of childhood education as well in a second. But I first want to try to slip in. You shopped around a bunch of different states from where you lived. You found Tennessee to be the one and only hospitable one to you being able to create life in a biblical marriage as well. Tell us your story about how you met your wife and how you ended up having grandkids now in the state of Tennessee.
That's a great question. And I'm going to tell you, God's brought me a long way. But so I was born literally in the state of Washington. I was born on base, Fairchild. My dad was in the Air Force. Well, we ended up in Wisconsin. That's where I grew up. And I had a wonderful childhood. You know, mom and dad were great, Ozzie and Harriet type deal. My dad worked the same job. My mom just kind of raised us and stayed home, you know, and then she had part-time jobs going through it. So going through the same school and such, that was my childhood. We didn't move anywhere once we got to Wisconsin. So I'm meeting and dating this girl in junior year of high school. And my dad, this was kind of in the spring, my dad says to me on a Saturday, he said, you know, I think that you're getting a little too serious with this girl. You need to focus on college. You need to be thinking about your future. This was on a Saturday. We had that talk. And the next day I seen this girl and I said, you know, instead of going to school tomorrow, which would have been Monday, I said, let's get married. And I was 16 years old, just turned 17, just literally turned 17. And she answered and she said, yes. Now that surprised me because I hadn't thought through what would happen if she said yes. And so the next morning, which would have been Monday morning, I picked her up. And we said, hey, you know, we'll just get married real quick and then we'll go to school. We'll come in a little late. Well, in Wisconsin, when you're 17, it is too young to get married unless you have your parental consent and so forth, which we didn't have. And so we couldn't get married. So we went over to across the state lines into Illinois. We lived in Lake Geneva. Illinois was the next state. And we found out in Illinois wouldn't marry us either. So we continued. The next state that was closest was Indiana. Now, remember, there was no cell phones, nothing like that, so you just had to drive from one spot to another. Got to Indiana, found out, no, they're not going to marry us either. So we're trying different states, and we finally ended up saying, where can we go? And we thought Kentucky. Now, being from Wisconsin, we heard Kentucky, oh, they'll marry anybody. So we drove all the way down to Kentucky and found out we could not get married. Now, I'm running out of money. And we're running out of gas in the car, and I'm thinking, okay, what do we do? We're runaways, you know, we're not where we're supposed to be and such. And I got an underage girl across state lines.
You're missing school?
Missing school, yeah. My folks know I'm not home. So I went to some teenagers that were literally standing on a street corner. Now, this is going to be back, 50 years ago. And I said to them, hey, where do y'all go to get married? Now, my hair was much longer at that point, and I looked like one of those hippie type guys. And they said, you got to go to Jamestown, Tennessee. They'll marry you there. And they said, you got to meet a guy named Judge Crooks. And I said, now, wait a minute. You're telling me Judge Crooks in Jamestown, Tennessee? And said, that's where you go. So we went to Jamestown, Tennessee, and sure enough, we met with the judge, and he said, met with his assistant, his staff, said, you come back the next day, and I'll marry you. So we came back, and it was a Thursday morning, and he married us, and that would have been 52 years ago, May 17th.
Wow.
May 17th.
Congratulations.
So God gave me this Proverbs 31 wife. I'm blessed. I didn't know the Lord at that time. She did. And because of her lifestyle, it talks that I ended up accepting the Lord shortly thereafter. But it was only because of the Lord. So we went back to Tennessee. I went from Tennessee to Wisconsin, and I had to drop out of high school, and I had to go to work. And that's what I did. I worked the best I could, and of course, without a high school diploma, no college, no nothing. You just do the best you can, any kind of minimum wage job. So I know what that is like to say I'm walking that life of saying I'm going to work minimum wage. I just got to work 2 to 3 jobs, whatever I could, and start going from there. Now God blessed us, and we ended up having an opportunity to move to Florida, which we moved to Florida, and we had 2 daughters. And then from Florida, we got to Tennessee. Now, I'm going to tell you, in Tennessee, it's been a different lifestyle here. We chose Tennessee. We looked at all over the country. I had an opportunity for job promotion. And they said, what part of the country would you like to do? I was in insurance. And we chose Tennessee. So we didn't get here by accident. We looked at taxes. We looked at weather. We looked at a lot of things, and Tennessee was our choice. Now that I'm here, my 2 daughters, we ended up with, between my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, I got 30. So it's been very, very, very blessed. 30, yes.
You will make great nations.
Amen. But one of my daughters, in fact, she's on a missions trip right now. She's over in Arizona, but she goes all over the world. And no matter where she is, she has a heart for children. And if there's a child in trouble, she takes them and will help bring them home. She'll help adopt them from wherever. So a lot of our kids, it will look like when we have a meal, and they're all in Wilson County pretty much, and so they're all there. We see them all the time. It looks like we have the United Nations because I got black, I got white, I got Mexican, I got biracial. We got a lot of different children. Some of our children have been through things that no girl should have ever been through. We've adopted some from DCS. One of them was born in jail. One of them was on drugs. So I have a huge background that we talk with about how do we get along? What do we do? So when people are talking to me about, you don't know what it's like, I do. I live this. And we all have this discussion at the dinner table saying, look, we have different backgrounds. We're not going to forget what happened to us, but it doesn't have to define our future. Our future is through Jesus Christ. And we want to make sure that we're always respecting each other at that table. So when we're together, we don't have to agree. But how we disagree is important. And I think that we carry that forward to the capitalist community. We need to learn to live and get along and find ways for solutions, but we also got to have the standard of biblical standard. We got to have something that we know this is what we're in agreement with, that we're standing on.
Well, this is exactly why you probably get along in the Democratic caucus in Davidson County, to be able to get things done and keep it on the down low, not out in public, where the liberal media would love to make an example out of you being this, let's just say white Christian nationalist, like Channel 5 likes to say, but
Yes.
they can't. They can't stick it. It won't stick on you. Okay, let's see. So you did mention your daughter and her wonderful mission for saving these young people and a passion for young people. You had a little bit of controversy, let's just say this year, about a bill that the same year that they passed vouchers, which seems like a very expensive bill, but many states are doing it. Ours is way better than Texas. We'll talk about other states in a second. In hindsight, and I've had a little, maybe 42 hours or more to think about it, what do you think about the vote about allowing illegal alien children to get full ride education in Tennessee?
A lot of my
And the magnets that go along with that.
Yes, and a lot of my very, very conservative friends and supporters have thought I lost my mind, okay, because I didn't vote for that. And I'm going to tell you that I literally try and say, God, I want you to direct me. I want you to do it. And I can't say very often. I've been doing this now for, I was 8 years in the House, and I'm going to be 8 years in the Senate. I can't tell you very often that the Lord's actually put something on me for an individual vote, but he did. And just as clear as I'm telling you, he told me, don't vote for that bill. And it's like, this is the type of bill I'd sponsor, okay? I mean, but if I believe that the Holy Spirit is leading me, and I'm truly trying to live my life by the Lord, and I'm thinking, God, this is going to go against all my base of people that could vote for me, conservatives and so forth. And it's like I had to make a choice. Am I serving them, or am I going to listen to the Lord? And I knew that I was going to just listen to the Lord, and then he's going to have to help me with the people that are uncomfortable with that vote. But if I have to do it again, I'm always going to put what I believe my Lord's telling me over whatever anything else is happening. Because if I don't, I'm not true to who I am and the life I'm trying to lead. There's two instances that this has happened. One of them, I was in the House and I made the front page of the Tennessean. And, it talked about...
It must have been bad.
Well, it talked about me, and it talked about a pastor and our different views in the legislature. And I said, I'm going to bring my Christian values, and I'm going to vote my Christian values every single time while I'm in the legislature. And the opposite side, and his picture was there, and he's a pastor. He said, well, he might be, he's a Christian, but he doesn't bring the values to his voting. He's going to bring his voting based on what his constituency says. And so we had two opposing trains of thought in that. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to stick with mine. I am a Christian. And people are going to have to know that this is how Pody's going to vote. He's going to vote on the biblical values that he believes in every time. They don't have to guess. So if something comes up and it's going to be, hey, what about same-sex marriage? They know Pody's going to vote this way. If it's going to be life in the womb, Pody's going to vote this way. If it's going to be traditional marriage, Pody's going to vote this way. They don't have to guess, and I'd rather have that out public, and people can make a choice. I'm uncomfortable with him representing me, or I am comfortable. If it's going to be 10 Commandments, we got a bill right now. I'm going to say, hey, let's put the 10 Commandments back in the schools. That's who I am. Then the other thing, I was on one of the stations caught me somewhere, and they said, you hear from God. And, I knew exactly what they wanted to do. They were saying, we want to come interview and find out what this legislator is talking to God about, and he's our state legislator. And they said, would you mind putting that on tape? I said, no, come and interview me. That's fine. So they came, cameras going, and the reporter saying, so you talk to God? Yeah. And I said, yes. And God talks back. And so it's going, you're telling me that you actually talked to God? And I said, absolutely. And I said, my God's not dead, and he's alive, and I got a way to go through him through Jesus Christ, and I want to introduce you to Jesus Christ. And we were on air. And they said, well, that's okay. And they cut the interview, and they never aired it. But
that was too dangerous for them and their narrative, right?
I am not going to back down from that. That is who I am.
That's good. And we need more legislatures like that if this is the way it's going to be. So tell us, okay, that's great. Tennessee is a very unique place for opinions like yours. I don't think in Washington State, where I'm from, you would have lasted 5 seconds. California, you may be there forever in Orange County, but you're going to be in the minority for your whole life. Here, you actually get things done. Tell us what we've done as a state for Jesus Christ and the Bible.
All right, so there's a few things that I'm going to work on, and one of them, I know we just had the National Day of Prayer. But when that was going through, when I first got to the legislature, even though it was a federal law at that point, there was talk about maybe that law should go away. Okay, and we had a different administration at that point, different president. And so I passed a law saying no matter what the federal government says, we're always going to have at least a state day of prayer. And May 1st and so forth. So I've done things like that. I've done things where I stood up and saying, no matter what the Supreme Court or any court says in our Constitution, it says marriage should be between a man and a woman. And so when that ruling came out a few years ago saying that Tennessee, our laws were going to be invalid, and that court ruling, I immediately wrote a law saying no matter what the Supreme Court said, that we're still going to stand up for marriage between a man and a woman. And now that law my bill didn't pass.
Did not pass.
It did not, but it was very close. And we believe that that's actually going to be unpacked a little bit more because how that ruling came, the people that brought that didn't actually have correct standing in Tennessee into the Supreme Court. Now, I'm not an attorney to bring that back up, but I am a legislature that I can continue to push that issue, and I think we're going to continue to push that issue that marriage should be between a man and a woman.
Plus, they already opened the door by saying these rights are state rights more than they are federal rights. So you being a state senator and we being a state called Tennessee, we have the right to stand for this.
That's exactly right.
And do you find the majority up there are with you on these, or are they pushing back on this? Because they are secular at times because they like to represent everybody, including Memphis and Chattanooga and the cities that are blue.
Right. And so it is a political hot potato for some, and they feel very uncomfortable with that. So they'll tell me on the side, yeah, we'll agree with you, but we don't want to put this in record. We don't want to vote that way. So we did not pass it, but doesn't mean we're not going to continue to try. And we've been working on that. Something else I've done is every year I try and make public statements from Tennessee that we stand with Israel. In fact, this year we formed an Israeli caucus with Tennessee. And biblically it says those nations that stand with Israel will be blessed. Those that don't, won't. And we're going to do that. So we actually moved that forward. I've had the Consulate General from the Southeast not come to the Capitol here several times to say, what can we do for Israel? One of the things that we're going to be working on this year is I'm writing a piece of legislation saying that Tennessee can actually buy Israeli bonds. We can't in the Treasury right now because of how our statutes are. However, as they're needing to raise money, as they're needing for the war effort and such, even if we did a small portion to say, hey, here's something that we can do as Tennessee to support them, I want to try and pass that as well. Then we just did pass resolutions. For example, July from now on will be a month of fasting and prayer for those that are spiritually inclined and physically able.
So that'll no longer be a one-time thing. That'll be every year.
Every year.
Before session begins.
That's right. So our fiscal year starts July 1st, and that is when
session begins January, but the fiscal year begins July.
Fiscal year begins July. So we can say that the Tennesseans that want to then feel led can say, God, we want to take time to stop and say, you are King. You are our leader. And Lord, we truly, no show, no nothing, Lord, we want you to be in control of Tennessee. We want you to guide us.
Amen. So given that, there were some symbolic, these are not mandatory, nobody's going to get arrested, if they were to go against it, but let's just say symbolic legislation that could have emphasized that. Not only did we pass recognition for, I think it's some Tennessee national holidays and things of this nature, or great things that we've done, but they didn't allow the bill twice now for, flags, alternative flags in the classrooms.
Yes.
Transgender flags, gay pride flags, BLM flags, divisive flags, things that are not unifying like what we're talking about. I scratch my head sometimes, not just with your vote on the school that you said, because you said you're very consistent. You kind of know, here's how Pody's going to vote. Let's go talk to other people on the fence about other things. Why do you think a conservative supermajority red Republican, Eastern Tennessee went for Barry Goldwater. That's how conservative they were over Reagan. And they always love to drape themselves in Reagan during campaign, but then they vote like this. Why do you think some of those bills didn't make it? And then I can get into a little bit more of the weeds on some of the other ones that you would think would be conservative, conservationist laws that I know you would go for, but the majority didn't. And they wouldn't even let it out of committee because I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, if it was put on the floor, no brainer, slam dunk. Those darn committees didn't show up to vote. Some things died, like the Trump Act. Can it get any more conservative than the name Trump on it? Changing the name of the B&A airport where you are, not to Dollywood, but to Trump, didn't pass, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
What's your take? Do you just scratch your head and go, come on, guys? Or do you just say, well, this is how democracy works?
All right. So I think some of my colleagues believe that they're a lot more middle of the road than what I am. They put me kind of as a fringe, and I've been called that hey, you represent the fringe because I'm an ultra conservative. And they feel that they need more of their support from the middle and from maybe conservative Democrats. And they take that into consideration from time to time on how they vote. And I just don't go there so much. It's not going to be how the conservatives or the liberals or whatever, how they're going to vote because of what I do here. I've got a constituency of one, okay? And mine is the Lord, and I've got to be truthful to him and honest to him. When I die, he's going to, I'm going to heaven, but there's going to be 6 words I'm looking for from my Lord. It's going to be, well done, good and faithful servant. And I can't worry about what is politically correct today. I've got to worry about what is spiritually correct for all time. And that's where my votes are. And that's why I can very much just feel, God, I'm working to do what I believe is best for you. Even when I say in prayer, if this is what God's leading me, I'm going to try and do exactly what God's telling me to do, whether it's popular or not popular. I'm the first person to say when I mess up, I messed up on that. And there's been votes in the past that I messed up on. But I think God's going to always say, you know what? This guy's at least trying to ask. If he doesn't always hear right, but he's trying. And that's where I got to come from.
And that's why places like Massachusetts and California would never embrace you. They would just be, who is this guy? All right. You also are on the Civil Air Patrol. You're a private pilot.
Yes.
Yep. There were some bills up there. We'll call them chemtrail bills, contrail if you are not into this. But last session it passed. This year they were going to have fines of $100,000. That failed, so that doesn't make any sense. Why would we want fines to the state? And I personally believe that biblical values are also conservation things. Like, why would Florida and Utah, after California and the CDC of all places exposed fluoride bad in the water, we said, no, we're going to continue to add that, et cetera, et cetera. Remittances. If you're here illegally and you send money back to your home state, we are going to fine you or charge you so that at least the state has some kind of revenue to be able to offset all of this free emergency room or free schools. That failed. Those are kind of biblical, if you look at it closely, values that we want: clean water, clean air. We don't want our crops to be polluted with aluminum and whatever else is out there. So why not put a $100,000 fine on there so the state can at least offset the health care that we're going to need if we do get sick, if you believe in it. So I know it's a stretch. I can say these things, you can't. And then lastly, I think I can lump it all in together. On the House side, the Assembly side, they created a new education committee just for one thing, and that's to join the other states that have gone a whole hog into what they're calling universal health or education, even though they're all different. They're not universal. They're kind of different. Texas is way worse than ours, and ours is way worse than, say, Washington. They put two people that are like you on the side over there, Jody Barrett and who's the other one? I'm blanking on his name, but that's okay. Sorry if you're coming on soon. Created a new committee, got it done. And that was the big deal. Last year's session was about guns because everyone was upset about the Covenant shooting. This year it was all about, are we going to get universal school choice? Got it done. Fantastic. What's your take on all that when they look at it through a lens of biblical versus a lens of political, I guess?
All right. So I want to take and reset just a second, okay? And there's roles of government, and those are set roles. But there's roles that government are not supposed to be involved in. And I'm going to take, as a child, God gives that child to a family. You got a father and a mother. And it's up to that family unit to raise their child. Now, if it gets to health, they're the ones that are supposed to be making all the health care decisions. Therefore, if there's anything going on with that child's health, they should have access to that, whether it be vaccinations, whatever that child's health is. The second thing would be education. How that child is raised is going to be and educated should be up to the parent. The parent's got several choices. Number one, they can choose to educate that child themselves. They just want to do it themselves. They shouldn't have to report it. They say, we are going to educate this child. God gave us this child. The second, they can say, you know what? Hey, we want to join kind of a co-op of a homeschool group, and they can do that. Third, they say, we want to do a private school system. They should be able to do that. And then last, they also can say, we're going to send our child and let the state actually have an input in raising or educating our child, and that would be the public school system. But it should be up to the parent to make that choice of where they want to go. But I think the government's kind of taken over the role, saying is, well, if you've got a child, it has to come to public education unless you can prove you're doing something different. And that's kind of overstepping on how I believe it's supposed to be. It's not that the government's going to say you have to come to public school unless you can prove something different. So I'm going to say, now listen, let the parents make that decision on raising the child. That's morally, that's religious, that's education, healthcare, and so forth. Now, a parent, if they're ever proven that they're abusing that child or abusing that, then the state has the obligation to do something about it. You can't beat your child. You can't, there are certain things that we can't do, but God gave the children to the parents. And that's where I want to come from, going from there. Now, public schools, when this last vote came in, I heard from a lot of my public schools and say, hey, you're taking money from us. And that was not true. Okay, when they're saying that there's $140 million that was designed for education, that is not true. That was money in the general fund, never delegated to education. It could have gone to infrastructure. It could have gone to healthcare. It could have gone to anything it wanted. It was never saying that this is education money. So we didn't change the amount of money we assigned to education for this. The governor said, we're going to take a new set of money and set that aside, and we're going to try this. And this is one of the governor's main things that he wanted to do, was to say, is this going to work? And he said, we're going to put it to 20,000. Now, Arizona kind of expanded very quickly, and they made some other silly decisions on their budget, but they also expanded so much that it ran into some budget issues. In Tennessee, we said, what we're going to do is we're going to start this. Now, if it hits a couple of triggers of how many people enroll, how many people are wanting to have their children go through this process of taking the voucher, then we might consider expanding it. But that's kind of key. It says a future General Assembly might say that we want to look to expand it, but that's got to be a future vote. That's only if there's money there. That's only if this program's doing well. If it's not, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to vote to move something forward that's not working. And if we don't have the money, I'm certainly not going to move forward to do that. But I'm not going to say that's public education money. I'm going to say that's money for parents to help make decisions going forward on what they want to do that's best for their child. So that was one of the things that going through. But when we talk about a biblical stance, mine is going to be based on what is the biblical stance of the parents are supposed to be the family unit, and the parents are responsible for that child, not government.
So how would you rate the final bill?
All right. I didn't love the final bill, okay? And I did not like the process that we went through. We did it in a special session, which made a lot of people very uncomfortable because it seemed to be rammed through.
It was Warner that was the other one I was thinking of. So
Yep.
Jody Barrett and Todd Warner were moved off of their education committee because of their disagreement, and they brought in some they got it passed. On the Senate side, it sounds a lot like the vote you took, that people were kind of mad at you, but they didn't punish you the same way by saying you're no longer going to be on the...
Yep. So I wanted to do different things to the bill. And this is exactly what I've suggested. I've suggested leadership. I even tried doing amendments to it and saying, look, if this is going to be a new source of money, and we've got a new gambling source of money coming in, and I said, take that source.
The gambling tax.
Yep. And so I said, allocate that money. And that's a brand new source. It's not in general fund. And say, we're only going to use that money. If that money, and that was $40-some million, okay, and we're going to just give that to whatever number of kids. If there's 10,000, divided amongst the 10,000. If there's 25,000, divided amongst the 25,000. So that money's going to be divided up, but it's not money in the general fund. It's only money going forward from there.
Be a usury tax to pay for education, which is that's the lotto in California is supposed to go towards education. I think they steal it, but that's another story.
But that was what I would have wanted to do.
Perfect, yeah.
And
if the Titans were ever good, it would be triple.
Yes. And so I think that would have made that bill a lot better. And I think public education would have been a lot more comfortable with it. And then it's not ever going to break the state because it's only going to be a set amount of money going forward. And if we would have done it in regular session, people could have come and vented. And a lot of people didn't feel they were heard.
Okay. Well, I've learned since I've been in Tennessee, coming up on 3 years now, not as long as you have been. I'm not in the legislature, so my time doesn't matter. But it's all about the committees.
Yes.
Bills die or come out of committee for the full Senate to vote on. Even popular ones do die. We've been talking about that. But you got your first committee 2019. Now you're on education and transportation, and a third one, state government committee. You're the second vice chair of transportation. What bills are you most proud of to come out of those?
I'm going to tell you one that I've been working on for years that I believe is something that is needed, and it came through partway this year. So I have proposed something for the last few years, ever since the gas tax was implemented, okay? And when they raised the gas tax, and I did not vote for that raise in the gas tax. We need money for the Department of Transportation. And these were the criteria that I'd be looking at. I want something that's reoccurring. So it's not something that we got to vote on every year. It's going to be reoccurring. Second, something that's going to keep up with inflation. So whatever amount that's going to come in, 10 years, it's going to be more because it's going to cost more. I wanted no new tax, and I wanted a user fee. So I've been trying to put a bill in that would fix our roads and infrastructure. And I've got a way that would be adding $1 billion a year to that. And what we would do is right now we know that the feds give us about $1.5 billion. The state puts in just over $1 billion as well. So that's just
2.5
right now. Okay, so we would almost double what the state's putting in. And so the bill that I've been pushing on, it says this. It says that if you buy a new car or a used car or a tire, or even getting your oil change, that money that goes to the general fund right now would be allocated towards the roads. It would go directly to TDOT. Listen, if you're buying a tire, it's going to go on a road somewhere, okay?
Especially if it's for a Tesla, which are Cybertrucks are heavy.
Yes. And you know what? If you're buying no matter what kind of car, it's going to be used for the road. Let that money go into the roads. We need that money for infrastructure.
I like that better than choice lanes or tolls, as they say.
Absolutely. And and I voted against the choice lanes as well. But we need to get money in there. And so this year, they took part of my bill and they let somebody else run it, but they put in at least a tire tax going through. So that's between $80 to $95 million this year, and it's going to grow because tires are going to cost more next year. They're going to cost more the following year, but it met every one of those things. Now, I've got that bill again, so I'm running that bill again in January to get the rest of it to move forward.
It is called Bridgestone Arena. I can imagine where they're not too thrilled with that, but okay, that's a good job standing up as you agree.
And that's no new tax. It's just putting in priorities of what we want. Now, I'm going to tell you that we have bills, and they say, Mark, if you're taking that out of the general fund, what are you going to cut? And that's a very fair question because these are real questions. Yeah. It's not our role as state government to do some of the things we are doing. It is our role to do infrastructure. That is our role. You can't go and say, hey, I want my road built by somebody else. But it's not my role to say every child gets a diaper. Okay, that is not the role of government. That is the parent's role. If somebody needs help, that's a church role. That's a service club role. That is not the state to be doing things like that.
Community, yeah.
So I would be saying, what is it that the state is doing that is not our role? That is somebody else's role, and we need to stop spending money there and put it into things that is the role of government. We've let government grow. And government grow. And we can say, oh, you know what, we've cut the size of government this way, but if we just did it through private contractors, just because we let the employees go, that's not cutting necessarily the size of government. We want to do it in a consistent way of where is it that the government doesn't need to be and get out of that. I think that what Trump is doing, he's taken a very fresh approach and saying, let's look at what the federal government's doing and cut the things that we don't need to be doing.
Follow the money. So how do you feel about, I believe your district touches it, the new NFL stadium coupled with the Speedway, coupled with the airport. And there was a big fracas when I first got here between the state and the airport. That's your district.
It is.
It was then too, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us just what's going on with that. And that money obviously would fix a lot of potholes. We do need our bread and circuses. So
there's a few things that we touched on there. One of them was the airport. We'll start with that. And so the airport was going to be who was going to run it. And it was typically by the city. The state came in and said, we're going to reconstitute what that board is. And they tried to put new board members on there and have it run by the appointees of the state, not the city. So the city took us to court and the city won. And it's been appealed. The last ruling just came out and the city ended up winning that and saying that it's going to be underneath the city control, not the state. The state could have done it in a different way, and they would have had standing. But the way they did it, they just said it's going to be only for basically Davidson County, not for statewide application, and therefore in the lawsuit they lost. The second thing is we mentioned the stadium. I did not vote for that stadium. I represent Davidson County. I do. And I want Davidson County to do the best it can. I'm not against the Titans in any way. But I do not believe that it is up to the state to say we're going to put in state dollars to NFL stadium.
A lot of them.
Yes.
A lot of dollars.
And even though I'm representing that area, it is not the thing, that's not the role of government to determine what professional sports we have or not have. And, the argument is, well, we have this, it's going to help us generate economic development. That's not what I believe we're supposed to be doing. I'm here to watch our taxpayer dollars. And if we're going to grow, it's going to be because we got the good economic environment, our tax rate and so forth, not because we give somebody money. And same thing when I'm talking about ECD. I don't think we should continue to bribe corporations to come here. We had something called the Blue Oval City, and I voted against that. It's like, and it passed, okay, but I'm one of the few people that said it's not right for Tennessee taxpayers to give Ford Corporation all this money, hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's still not going. And there's
the interesting thing about that, from my perspective, is I come from a Washington state where there's also not an income tax. Mm-hmm. Tennessee does not have an income tax. When you give a corporate tax break to a company, the goal is to make it back somehow in the employee's taxes. We don't do that. So we're basically giving it a freebie. So you talked about zero-sum game in the budget. For that billion-ish dollars that you just said combined into all those programs, where's it going to come back from? They don't even give us an NFL franchise fee to be able to say, well, here's state, thank you for your land. The Titans could pick up and move to Missouri tomorrow and start seeing it, just like Ford saying, well, we're not actually going to build that plant. Anyway, that's not your issue. That's just the state of Tennessee, and I would not want an income tax to offset that.
No.
But when the players, the Titans, go to Pittsburgh to play, they get to pay income tax to Pennsylvania.
Yes. But again, the state does not need to be in professional games. That's not our role to be in professional sports. That is
Gambling, I can get behind taxing gambling because you don't have to do that. Just like you don't have to smoke cigarettes, but you have no choice if you live in Knox County to pay a tax that's going to ultimately fund a stadium you may never see.
Yes.
And I dealt with that in San Francisco when Candlestick Park was built, and people in LA were like, "I'm never going there." Okay, so what are you most disappointed by then from your time on committees?
Sometimes I'm going to be more disappointed in myself to say, how is it I wasn't able to convince my fellow legislators that this is the right thing to do, even though it's a political stand. You just have to put that political capital out for it. It is the right thing to do.
What's one that sticks with you?
So we had an abortion bill, and it was going through, and it got killed in committee. And it's just standing up for life in the womb. This is before the trigger law went in. And so I had a bill, and it died in committee. How it died in committee, I was very disappointed. I did not know what was going to happen, but it all seemed that they knew what was going to happen before I did, and I'm the sponsor of the bill. So I tried to bring that directly to the floor. And I went around, and everybody, from leadership, they're all saying, Pody, don't do this. It's going to really tarnish your reputation. It's going to put members in a bad light and so forth. And I said, I don't care. This is the right thing to do.
It made your reputation, actually.
Well,
which is a good thing from my perspective.
Well, I did. I went against leadership, went against everybody. And I got killed, okay, and just, but I didn't understand why. And so I'm in prayer saying, God, this was the right thing. This is what you have me doing. And it didn't go through the way that I thought it would. But in my spirit, it was like, it wasn't for you to pass it. It was to put it out there, and people were going to make a choice, and that's recorded.
Yeah.
And so I got peace a little bit about it, but I was disappointed because I know lives were being lost at that point.
So I know you have to work with these guys, so it's easier for me to say than you. But when you look at it in terms of how committee members are respected, treated, dealt with by leadership on one side, you got Cameron Sexton. On your side, it's different kind of rules and regulations. You, in that instance you're talking about, you were treated much better than had you been over there. You'd be done. I mean, I could go down a list of people who didn't win re-election or were left off of committees to get somebody else's priorities passed. Have you observed that? Well, how do you feel about that? Am I wrong? Is the Senate do it nicer, more congenially?
Well, I can tell you that there have been senators that have been kind of targeted or whatever, and
Frank nicely.
And Frank was a very conservative individual, because a lot of votes that he and I took, very seldom did we vote against it. If he voted that way, I was finding I'm voting the same way.
For those that don't know, he did not win re-election. He was not there this session.
That's exactly right. A lot of money was spent against him, a lot of money. However, for the most part, my battle is not with my fellow Republicans or Democrats, whatever. I'm going to look at this. This is a spiritual battle. And I've got to win this on a spiritual basis. Lord is going to work this out for me. If I follow Him, I've got to give the results to Him as well. And God, I'm only doing, and it reminds me of sometimes Jeremiah. And I don't want to say I'm a Jeremiah, the prophet. Okay, but you know what? If you look at it, it didn't go his way. Okay, I mean, it wasn't. He was the weeping prophet. Nothing seemed to be going his way. But God's saying, just do this. I'm not asking you to get the results. I'm asking you to do this. And sometimes I feel...
didn't say it would be easy and you'd be comfortable. I said do it.
That's exactly right. And sometimes I feel God's not telling me it's going to pass or not pass. He's just saying, I want you to turn right. Are you going to turn right or not? I want you to do this. Are you going to
Jonah
do it
had
or
to
not?
go in a whale, east or west, and then get him all the way back by a whale to finally say, okay, I'll go to Nineveh.
That's it. And sometimes it's faith, and I don't know why God tells me to do certain things or whatever, but either
Ours is
really
not a reason why.
That's right. Either in my spirit, in my heart, Mark, are you living for the Lord? Are you going to do everything you can to do that publicly, privately, in every area of your life, or you're not? And that's where I got to say, my battle is with Satan. My battle is a spiritual battle, and I just want to please my Lord.
Yeah, I fully believe that if there was a vote of one and it was you and the other 22 were, I think it's 23 of you, senators?
There's 33 of us all together.
33, sorry. Well, Democrats, I don't count those.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so what are your big hopes for next session?
I do want to bring something that's going to define life. When the Roe v. Wade ruling came out, and this would have been in the 70s, and one of the dissenting justices said, listen, it's up to the states to define life. And that was literally written, and it's up to the states. Well, the states really haven't come up with a way to do that. So I'm going to be going, and I met with the Attorney General, and I said, I want to help legally something that you believe that you can defend, but will put the definition of life in our code. What is life?
That would be the first state to do it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's what I'm going to work on next year.
All right. And then do you plan to run for re-election, or do you want some other seats in the future, which I know politicians never tell you their future. I don't want to be president of the United States.
So I can tell you my future, okay? I will. This is as blunt as I can be. After my last election, my wife and I, we took and burnt our signs. We said we were done. Okay, I mean,
the Vikings burning their boats.
That's exactly right. I said, honey, praise the Lord, we were good. And just to give a little context, when I ran the first time, this was in Wisconsin, and I ran as an independent. I didn't like everything the Republicans did. I didn't like everything the Democrats did, and I thought, I'm going to run as an independent. I was young. I didn't know the Lord. I was very young in that way. I just accepted the Lord, and God let me lose. I'm going to tell you the best thing that happened in my life. I was too young spiritually to even know to stand up to some of the battles that were there. And at the time, I didn't know it. It's like a 16-year-old saying, well, man, here's a race car. You know what I'm saying? And the parents said, no, that's not the car you're going to start with. I was too young as a Christian to win. And I just believe the Lord protected me. So now when I'm in here, my wife and I said, we want to go home. And so with the last election, we were ready to be done, and looking forward to spend time with my kids and grandkids, and I got a little farm, and so forth. But God's not released me. So even though that was my plan, I am running for re-election next year. So I'm already starting. I'm already letting people know I am running. I'm running for the Senate. Others have said, well, what about another office? I have zero reason to be running for a statewide office. The Lord's not put that in my heart. Nothing in Washington. The Lord's not put that in my heart. He's put me and said, I'm in Tennessee, and that is what is on my heart. I've got to do in Tennessee. He's put me here, and I believe I'm supposed to stay and run for re-election right here.
Okay. You have to get new signs.
How
do you think Tennessee, for example, 68% of Alabama adults identify as Christian, largest state in America. So, it's not a fair comparison, but it is one of our 50. Tennessee is about 55, I think the last poll said. Hard to believe, but who knows? That's not churchgoers. That's just identify as it. But how do you think Tennessee Senate stacks up against the biblical values and the legislation?
I believe that most of the senators would say that they are Christian, that they do believe. But there's a portion of them that will say, I'm going to separate my Christian beliefs from other things that we do, and just because I might believe that personally doesn't mean that's the way I'm going to vote. And that's when it can get a little bit frustrating, because I'm not going to judge what they do. That's not my role. But I do know when I'm voting and counting votes that they might be saying that they're a Christian, but they're going to vote against it.
Have they bought into the mistake of history by saying Thomas Jefferson put into the Constitution a separation of church and state, meaning that they, A, never read the Constitution, and B, that isn't even true? So
it is absolutely not true, and it's actually the opposite. Because I think when that was being written and talked about and such, it was a question: should the church be kind of involved? What are you going? Is the state going to limit us? And the answer is no.
It was actually a one church, not churches.
Yes.
Freedom of religion.
So, we look at that the state can't get involved in the church, but the church can absolutely be involved in the state. And I believe that the church needs to grow and to be more active and to let their voice heard. I don't think it's right to say, Yeah, but each person got to justify their own to say, you know what, I'm a Christian and that happened, but I didn't do anything about it. I just let it go on. Just like when the Jews were being murdered in Germany, and they let it go on, and there were Christians there, and they said the trains were going by, and they turned up, they started singing louder so they wouldn't have to hear it. And I think that we're going to be the same way. This was happening in front of us, underneath our noses, in broad daylight, and there's a lot of Christians that said, well, I'm just going to wash my hands of it and not be involved.
It's happening in Texas right now. SB 0021 and SB 0027 deal with government overreach. I guess a biblical government wouldn't really need to deal with that unless it was, Nebuchadnezzar, I guess. But tell us why you wanted to define, quote, governmental entity and to limit the governor's emergency authority and powers.
Yes. So in the year 2000, there was a bill that said that if there's an emergency, that the governor would have blanket authority of saying what he can and can't do to deal with that emergency. And if there's an emergency, you need somebody in charge. You got to have a contingency plan, what's going to happen and who's going to be able to make those rules. And I support that. However, in that piece of legislation, it said, well, there's a couple things you can't do. One of them, you can't take somebody's Second Amendment away. Well, if you're saying that you can do everything except you can't take the Second Amendment away, does that mean you can take all the other ones away? And so
it does, actually.
So we thought this is like, I want to make it very abundantly clear. You cannot take anything that the Constitution says that is protected. You can't step on that. You can do a lot of other things. You can take away the bills that executive orders, policies, procedures that you put in. You can do some of the things the legislature. If the legislature said we're going to advocate this power and authority to you, that the legislature can do that. But you cannot take away the Constitution. And so this bill was just to make it very abundantly clear that you cannot do that. There were some places that they said, we're going to shut down churches, or we're going to say you can't assemble. You know what? That's not anywhere where a government can tell you that you can't worship for whatever reason.
Where I find this most heartbreaking is that Washington State, your old state, had a governor who took emergency powers for 1,000 days, almost. Not a single county at the time had COVID, which was the reason for this emergency, at the time that he kept it. So we knew he was acting like a dictator. Why should a state representative, one governor, have a blanket authority over all 95 counties of Tennessee? And so Lee and Inslee actually were acting very similar in this regard. Now, they behaved differently, but in terms of constitutional law, it's hard to split what they did that was any different. And I do not want Tennessee to ever act like the bluest of blue states, Washington, when it's supposed to be the reddest of red states. So what you're hitting on here is hugely important because there will be another emergency someday.
Yes.
And every county has a sheriff, every county has a police department, every county has a fire department, EMTs. We have authority that can handle emergencies. You don't need a governor wherever he lives, wherever county he's from, making decisions for Blount County, Knox County, Shelby County, when they probably didn't have any more COVID left, or they don't have the flu, or they don't have whatever it is that this is going on. So you were absolutely right. And tell me how the legislatures, looking at that, didn't go along with you.
Well, it ended up passing.
This time.
And yes, and the governor didn't sign it, though. Okay, so they let me know it went into law without his signature. However, that was the first step that we did do. There was another bill that we're trying to do, and it has to do with our state veterinarian. And right now, the state veterinarian has authority to come onto somebody's property, and I understand that we need to have our livestock protected. It's our number one industry is agriculture, but the way that it's worded, we've given our state vet the authority to come onto my property, my farm, and do whatever they think they need to with my animals. And then it says it may compensate me, So, but if they kill my animals, okay, or vaccinate my animals, or do whatever they think they need to my animals, and
this is real. So if they say, "Hey, we sensed some bird flu here, kill 100,000 chickens, and that's your livelihood," you are effed.
Yes. And then
this is the exact same thing the health department of Washington did about kids and adults.
And then they're going to say, you got to make sure they're all taken care of and buried. So not only did you kill them, you got to
Pay for the burial and the funeral and the rabbi to come and bless them. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So we ran a piece of legislation saying that if this is going to happen and you need to do that veterinarian is going to have to say this. They've got to get approval from the governor. Or if they can't get approval from the governor, they can get it from the state legislature. But they can't just do it on their own. There's got to be an elected official.
Check and balance of
That's
some kind.
exactly right. Now, that bill failed. And I also said that if you're going to kill somebody's animals, you have to compensate them. For whatever reason, if you're in there killing those animals, you got to take and make sure that as the state's doing it, you got to compensate whoever you did that with. Now, look, if I did something where I'm breaking the law and I'm bringing in blackleg, I'm bringing something on purpose, and that's different. But if I'm just a farmer and my neighbor 2 doors down did something and they're just going to use mine as containment and kill all my animals, those farmers need to make sure that they are compensated for what's going on.
Yeah, that's a property rights issue for sure. And that, okay, that's a whole can of worms there because I don't like that at all.
But that's another constitutional time that I'm standing up.
Why do the vets make dogs get vaccinated for staying in a kennel? I don't put my dog in a kennel because I left the state of Washington because they wanted to vaccinate all of us. And I said, no, thank you. And now I got here and it's like, well, you're fine, but your dog's got to get it. Well, it's a human too.
That's interesting. Okay. I was not aware of that.
You're not aware of that? Well, make it stop.
Send me an email.
Okay. But I like that because like I said, I moved here to get away from tyrannical form of government in Washington State, and a governor that kept those powers, it was just completely unconstitutional. And like SJR 1135, we're wrapping it up here, I promise. Separate ourselves from any attempt the federal government would make to bind us into any sort of agreement that would infringe on citizens' constitutional rights. That's a mouthful. For example, World Health Organization.
Yes.
Why did you feel that was necessary? What are they doing to Tennessee that you want stopped? And are they infringing on us?
So if we look back at the Biden administration last year.
Try not to, but we have to. Yeah.
He was literally signing some things saying that he's going to give and authorize the United States to be bound by World Health Organization's procedures and policies. And if they make that what the World Health Organization says, the United States would have to fall underneath that. And he was signing those things. So I'm saying absolutely not. He does not have the constitutional authority to do that to start with. But we wanted to make it very clear that we are not underneath the World Health Organization or any other world organization like that. And so we're running that piece of legislation to say, no matter what, the federal government, they have to stay in their lane and they cannot dictate our health to us or those kind of things to us. And we wanted to make this.
America has to remember that we are 50 independent states, 50 countries, and we should never give our sovereignty over to any organization, whether it's the UN, WHO, Bill Gates, any of his friends, because then we are no longer a sovereign state. We become a collective.
And Steve, this is so important that we even have the 10th Amendment, and our legislators and our states have forgotten that, and they've advocated that authority to the federal government where they think the federal government is stronger than the states. The federal government is only here because the states gave them that authority in a limited basis, but they have allowed them to continue to grow and overstep that. And anytime I can clearly say no, I want to clearly say no, and this is one of the things I'm saying. Federal government, stay out of our business. This was not given to you.
One of the biggest problems in society today is that the Governors Association is made up of a bunch of progressives. I mean, there's some standouts like DeSantis, but he is not even in leadership. Lee is supposed to be there for what you just said, but I find most Republican governors to be progressive federalists.
Without throwing stones at any individual governor anywhere, I can find that if you watch the money from the federal government, there is money that is given to governors and states that get more money and such. And I am the type that say, I don't want the money. Give me my freedom.
The strings attached to that money is very expensive.
That's exactly right.
Are you for nullification?
Yes.
Janice Bowling's bill?
Absolutely. I've seconded that several times. I've even had that when we did the summer study.
Think it'll ever
I hope so, but it is not with our current makeup in the legislature right now.
Tennessee gets a lot of money, as you just said, from D.C. That's kind of the job of an appropriator, to go to D.C. and bring the money back because we had to pay it in federal income tax. Do you think we could ever really afford to go to loan without aid like Department of Education or Medicaid?
So I'm all for what we call block grants, and I've suggested this, that, we're watching Tennessee. The amount of money we get from the feds is a pretty high percentage in our budget compared to other states. We've got to cut that. So as we're watching the federal government starting to cut that money coming to us, the nonprofits, the groups that are getting that money are crying foul, and they're coming to me as a state saying, you need to pick this up because the federal government's cutting back. I am saying absolutely not. I did not agree to pay that money as a state, and we don't need that program as a state. You're going to have to find alternative ways to pick that up, not from the state of Tennessee taxpayers. That's one reason why I don't want to expand more money coming from the federal government. When they say it's free money, there are $30-something trillion in debt, and they're going to continue to cut money to the states, not add to it. So we got to be very cautious. So moving that forward, how we're doing this with federal money, the strings and so forth, if they want to block grant that money for what we pay in health to us, let the states do the money. If they want to block grant that money for what they're doing in education, let the state do it. We can do it a whole lot better, and I think we're going to watch some of that coming in with the Trump administration on education very shortly.
Yeah, that's the way it was intended. That's the way it was supposed to be. Things did change. So way back in 2022, a long time ago, right? You came out strong against taxpayer-funded lobbying.
Yes.
Which is really the crux of all of this. Have you seen any slowing down of that, or maybe the opposite? It speeded up, and even more in the last 3 years since we just talked about the whole emergency powers for a pandemic, let's just call it. And of course, I asked that, and it's tough to do, is because we've got a lot of corporate power up there. I'm convinced that the dental lobby is why we didn't get fluoride out of the water like Utah did. I'm convinced DuPont or Bayer are the reason why they didn't want a $100,000 fine for chemtrails. I could be wrong. There may not be such thing as chemtrails, I'll admit. What have you seen from your outspokenness in 2022 to 2025 session that just ended regarding taxpayer-funded lobbying?
All right. So I want to separate this just a second. I like some of the lobbyists that they come in and talk to me because they're experts in subjects and they can give me, but I understand that they're paid to share information for whatever organization they're looking for. So I'm not against them coming in. I am against, though, taxpayer funded. And that's a big difference when I'm taking somebody's money, just mom and dad, they're working, or a retired person, and we're forcing them to pay a taxpayer-funded lobbyist to work against something that they're wanting done. That's not right. And I watched this current administration, their budget's grown in this. Their budget has gotten a lot bigger than it was in previous, and I don't think that's right. That's not the right way. School boards, they've got lobbyists. Superintendents, they got lobbyists. I'm going to tell you, I don't mind somebody coming telling me my lane is public education. Stay in that lane. But if you want to come tell me and try and fight against then homeschoolers, you're out of your lane, and that is not right. If we want to pass a bill saying homeschoolers can do this or that, that shouldn't be up to public education sending their lobbyists to try and stop a bill like that.
It is a very interesting situation because obviously a corporate lobbyist, we know what their interests are, and
Yes.
they're getting paid to do it, and they should.
Yep.
It's a livelihood. It's a business. But when it comes down to it, it's a lot like even FDR said public service unions should not exist. It's not very nice to have your own staffers lobbying against your own constituents. That's a conflict. Don't do
Yes.
that. But we have them. The SEIU is a big deal. Do you think Tennessee would ever say doors are shut to taxpayer-funded lobbyists, or is this just going to be part of the game?
Not
to guys
underneath-
like you and gals like Janice to say, I'm going to listen, but I'm not going to be swayed by it, as other ones they may say, I love steak and bourbon. Let's go out. Let's talk.
All right. So we need to find a way to stop it, but we don't have the makeup in the current legislature to do that. However, the next governor could actually make a big difference in that as well. And so whoever the next governor is, that should be one of the key questions that people are asking. What do you think? Are you going to have lobbyists? Because it's the executive branch that has a lot of these that do it. But if we can stop it at one area, I think we can stop it in all of them.
Okay.
That's counties are sending their lobbyists down, cities send their lobbyists down, schools send their lobbyists down. These are taxpayer lobbyists. And I don't like that. It doesn't feel right.
No, and that's what the Department of Education is too. Last question. I went to the Davidson County Reagan Day dinner. They want to call it Trump Day dinner, whatever. Lots and lots of enthusiasm for potentially turning Davidson County red. I believe it when I see it, but if you look at a map of Tennessee, red as can be, Little Island, Memphis, Little Island, Nashville. Do you think that's possible?
Let me phrase this. I look at what Trump did, okay, and the votes that he got. Do I think we're going to win a countywide race there? Probably not at this moment. But do I think that there's pockets in there that we can win? Yes, I do. I think that if we look at some of the commission seats, how they are, or possibly school board, if we will be wise and target and start going. At one time, Tennessee was actually a blue state. And
Not that long ago.
No. And so they were able to say, we're not going to try and do the whole state, but they started saying, can we focus and start picking off a little bit? And where are the swing areas that we can make a difference? And we got to make sure that we have a very sound unison voice when we're doing it. If the party itself is going to fight each other, that's not the news that they want. You know, we watch the Democrats in disarray, across the nation at this point, which is great for Republicans. But if they get their act together, we know that they're going to do the same thing. They're going to be targeting and picking off those swing seats that they think they might be vulnerable in. We got to defend every seat. They don't. They only have to say what seats do we think and focus all their money and attention on those seats. Makes it harder.
And this session was a lot more disciplined than last session when they had the covenant situation that they got the bullhorns down in the Assembly. Senate seemed very reasonable, but they did get a special session out of it. It failed. So they are politically irrelevant, let's just say. And it is, like you said, infighting. If a Rhino or a Republican or a Ford versus a Reagan type of Republican makes a mess, it's not a Democratic problem. It's a Republican. But we're going to be getting a new governor next year.
Yes, sir.
You'll be running for re-election. How can people follow you and get involved in your campaign and help you?
I got a website, markpody.com. So it's just my name.com. And I would just appreciate any kind of support and help. But the biggest thing I'm going to need is prayers. And I'm going to tell you, we got the base right, and that is that we stay in prayer, that we're going to be working the right way. With the Lord in charge, things will work out. It talks about if we have good leaders, the people are happy. If we have bad leaders, the people suffer. So we need good leaders. So, and Timothy talks about praying for your leaders, and we covet those prayers. But if they are in the area and they want to help, whatever, send me a note. They can contact me, markpody.com.
Excellent. All right. Well, it's going to be a sad day when you don't run for re-election and don't up there, because I don't know how they're going to find a replacement for you. But thank you very much for your time. Second time on the show. Good luck.
Thank you. It's been a blessing here, and I just pray blessings on you and your show and those people that are listening. We just pray blessings and protection on them in the name of Jesus.
Amen. Thank you. I'll be right back.
Sing a song about the heartland, the only place I feel at home. Sing about the way a good man works until the daylight's gone.
Thanks for coming back. It's that time to remind everyone to please subscribe to the heartlandjournal.com. That's how we grow and keep this contest free for you. And this month, the very first annual Heartland Journal Awards will be given out. So thank you for voting if you did. And I look forward to next year, and we'll get some new artists to show them their love. Now, the Heartland Journal news. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRI antidepressants, have a variety of horrendous side effects. These include sometimes causing the individual to become agitated, feeling they can't be in their skin, turning psychotic, and occasionally becoming violently psychotic. During these psychosis, individuals can have out-of-body experiences where they commit lethal violence either to themselves or others. As lawsuits later showed, this violent behavior and the frequent suicides that followed it were observed throughout the SSRI clinical trials, but were covered up by the SSRI manufacturers and then the drug regulators, for example, the FDA. Once the SSRI entered the market, there has been a wave of SSRI suicides and unspeakable acts of violence, which continue to this day. Sadly, the idea that SSRIs could cause any of this has always been viewed as a quote-unquote conspiracy theory, or mistaking correlation with causation, because very few are aware of the extensive evidence linking SSRIs to violent and psychotic behavior, despite it now being on the warning labels of those very drugs. While the tendency to provoke violence towards others is a major issue with SSRIs and other related medications, it is rarely considered a side effect of these drugs. One reason for this is that the other severe adverse effects from these medications are much more common. For example, SSRIs are one of the most commonly used of bipolar disorder. And as a result, these awful effects occupy a disproportionate focus when discussing their toxicity. However, focused on this issue because, like the sudden deaths caused by the COVID-19 vaccines, it is so unmistakable and concerning, it cuts through any of the ambiguity over what the drugs or vaccine is doing. Sadly, in addition to SSRIs extremely damaging, it is very questionable if, for most people, excluding those with a metabolic type that responds to SSRIs, these drugs have any benefit beyond statistical artifacts created by biased corporate research. This is incredible, tragic, since it results in many people taking a pill that ruins their life, but simultaneously had nothing of benefit to offer them in the first place. I am not a doctor, but this is from research that I've been able to find. Note, did you know that Prozac was first discovered? Eli Lilly originally planned to sell it as an obesity drug, but pivoted to it treating depression because Lilly recognized that since depression is so subjective, it would be easy to create proof Prozac worked even if nothing happened. It resulted in effective treatments for depression, of which there are many, becoming largely forgotten since there is no money in adopting those approaches. The SSRIs being muscled through the approval process had a coercive influence on the drug regulators and left us with a profound degree of corruption the public has repeatedly had to suffer through. Also note, many of the regulators who signed off on the SSRIs either had already worked for the SSRI industry or soon after pushing the SSRIs through, left their regulatory agency, like the FDA, and were hired by the drug industry. This is not too different to how many of the officials to subsequent FDA commissioners, for example, who muscled the COVID-19 vaccines through the approval process while simultaneously blocking safe and effective treatments for COVID-19, then left the agency and were rewarded with lucrative executive positions with the mRNA vaccine manufacturers themselves. In short, I believe what happened with the SSRIs provides a pivotal lesson for the modern vaccine safety movement. In both cases, we've seen incredibly dangerous but profitable pharmaceuticals be pushed upon the entire world, but rather than our regulators do their jobs and protect the public, they've sided with the industry they are supposed to regulate, which in part is due to how much of the FDA's funding comes from big pharma. However, while these COVID-19 vaccines are almost complete immune from lawsuits, the SSRIs were not. And as a result, extensive litigation spearheaded by families of those directly harmed by SSRI violence were able to get the secret files which showed how abhorrent the industry's conduct actually was. One of the most remarkable things about the SSRI saga is that as bad as the SSRI story is, the government was actually much less corrupt than and many were willing to try to do something about what was happening, something which has been almost non-existent throughout COVID-19 era. In turn, Kim made a particular poignant comment on the sad state of affairs. Kim Witzak on Twitter wrote, "Thank you, share away. I have a post coming on the similarities of situation with COVID vaccines and antidepressants and what's different. I truly believe we lived in the era of today with medical and social media censorship, we would have never have gotten the black box warnings. It was brutal, and we're working with FDA and Congress almost weekly out in DC. I will never forget my trip to meet the families after Parkland, Florida. I went down to Florida to let the grieving families know about link with psych drugs. If we don't start, quote, walking down a different street, unquote, nothing will change." In conclusion, I recognize that this is an immensely challenging subject, and I appreciate you for being able to maintain a level head while reading it, listening to it. Thank you for the time and focus you have given to this topic and for sharing it with others who can benefit from it. Lastly, I know this has already been stated, but do not attempt to stop taking an SSRI without the assistance of a physician who understands how to taper them. Very bad things can happen if you do not follow that advice. In the next part, we'll discuss the less severe but far more frequent harms of the SSRIs, some of which affect over half of the users. This is followed by examining how the drugs, this dangerous, could have gotten onto the market, and the egregious corruption within the FDA that kept anything from being done about it as the injuries and deaths piled up as RFK Jr. continues to roll out this information. Finally, we'll cover how the pharmaceutical industry created the depression industry and convinced the entire world to spend billions on their unsafe and frequently ineffective treatments for it, while simultaneously dismantling the actual causes of depression and its non-monetizable treatments. Lastly, if you have a way to get the data to this series, to me, steve.heartlandjournal@yahoo.com. Also, until yesterday, the Biden administration's plan for countering domestic terrorism was classified. Now, thanks to DNI Tulsi Gabbard, it's public. It's a roadmap for left-wing ideological warfare. Didn't take 50 years like JFK's assassination either. As promised, she declassified the Biden administration's strategic implementation plan for countering domestic terrorism. She tweeted at DNI Gabbard, April 16th. Sorry, it was just on April 5th. She said, "Thank you for your work. We are already on this and look forward to declassifying this and other instances of the government being weaponized against Americans under President Trump's leadership at ODNI.gov. Will bring transparency and accountability to end the weaponization of our intelligence communities." You can see the whole white paper at odni.gov/index.php strategic implementation plan for countering domestic terrorism. Moms and dads and prayer warriors at Planned Parenthoods. In June of 2021, the Biden administration released its public strategy for countering domestic terrorism. In a lawsuit at America First Legal, discovered that there was a separate classified version of this plan, but the private version wasn't public until now. That's who she was replying to on X when she said, as promised, America First Legal. Okay, so what is it and who cares, right? Why should you care? This was written in the early months of the Biden presidency, but it lays out in detail exactly what they would go on to do and how they justified it. By adopting the framework of domestic terrorism, DT, they would effectively treat their critics as enemies of the state. What's remarkable about the document is that it's an explicitly ideological vision. Its scope extends far beyond criminal violence. It encompasses online speech, education, gun control, even election participation. It's a strategy to suppress not just individuals, but ideas. The plan lays out a 4-pillar strategy. 1, understand and share DT-related information. 2, prevent DT recruitment and mobilization to violence. 3, disrupt and deter DT activity. 4, confront long-term contributors to DT. That's a lot of jargon. Here's what it actually means. Pillar 1 is information sharing. That's the whole of government strategy and practice. They wanted every arm of the government to be a partner in this. Remember, when this document refers to domestic terrorism, DT, we know what they mean because they publicly told us. In the Washington Times headline, Biden administration may be reviving effort to label concerned parents as domestic terrorists. Pillar 2 is preventing recruitment and mobilization. In practice, this meant mobilizing the security state to censor and suppress right-wingers. We know this because it was detailed in the thousands of pages of documents we unearthed when she sued the Biden administration in 2021. Tablet Magazine, Arts and Letters, America's censorship regime goes on trial. Missouri versus Biden will test the government's ability to suppress speech in the name of fighting misinformation. April 10th, 2023, by Yenin Yunus. The plan lays out the roadmap for how the Biden administration would partner with powerful third-party actors, big tech, left-wing NGOs, anti-hate groups, etc., to implement this censorship regime. The left spent the past decade building a vast censorship enterprise, a shadowy network of NGOs, tech groups, and governments working to censor the left's enemies, not just in America, but across the West. Pillar 3 is about transforming the mission of the security state to place a higher priority on prosecuting domestic terrorism and pushing for expanded powers to pursue that agenda. And that's what they did. In Biden's first year, the FBI more than doubled its DT caseload. CBS News, FBI has more than doubled domestic terrorism caseload, by Nicole Spanga, September 21st, 2021. See, not hiding it, plain sight. Once again, we know what DT meant, because we saw it in practice. Pro-life activists, parents, traditional Catholics, conservatives, and the military all were targets. The plan goes so far as to discuss putting Americans with no ties to foreign terrorism on terror watch lists. Action 3.3.1c, purely DT subjects with no international nexus should be included. Pillar 4 is just openly advocating for the entire federal government to become a vehicle for leftism. It calls for funding, quote, civics education, end quote, to reach, quote, action civics, unquote, read left-wing activism, and wielding law enforcement to mitigate xenophobia and bias in COVID policy. Finally, it calls for a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Once again, this was a preview of how they would operate. The Biden administration regularly used the specter of domestic terror as a pretext to push for crackdowns on gun rights. President Biden's fiscal year 2023 budget calls on Congress to deliver the funding needed to implement the president's comprehensive strategy to reduce gun crime and make our communities safer. Ensure that no terrorist can buy a weapon in the United States. When it dropped in 2021, the public version of this domestic terrorism plan generated a huge backlash. It was the first time in U.S. history that a president had ever come out with a national plan to combat domestic terrorism. Even the hard left ACLU came out against it. ACLU, News and Commentary, Biden's Domestic Terrorism Strategy, Entrenched Bias and Harmful Law Enforcement Powers. That's a headline from their website. But the private internal one is worse. It's specific, direct, and doesn't hide behind vague, sweeping generalities. When read in light of everything the Biden administration went on to do in those 4 years, their overarching goals are crystal clear. Joe Biden's evil plan exposed. DNI Gabbert. DNI Gabbert declassified at Joe Biden's secret plan to eliminate the Second Amendment and name in the name of counterterrorism. Then you go down to action 4.1.1a, rein in the proliferation of ghost guns, encourage state adoption of extreme risk protection orders, and drive other executive and legislative action, including banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, all under Section U, Pillar 4, confront long-term contributors to domestic terrorism. Now, aren't you so glad you showed up at those school board meetings like we asked you to? That is it for this episode. Thank you, Senator Pody, for serving in government all this time, but not seeming to forget who you work for up there, the voters that sent you. Many think it's the corporate interest that back them, but it's not always. This is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of HeartlandJournal.com. See you all next time. Peace in our time, and definitely glory to God.
Yeah, I've been dreaming of the wild, wild plains, walking where the pine trees dance.
Heartland Journal Podcast is the media property of HeartlandJournal.com, where you can find news stories, commentary, and content serving the heartland of America. Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of the people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.